OpenTV Beta grew out of my research project in grad school. I wrote my dissertation on web series, interviewing independent producers of their own television shows, uploading them to YouTube and Vimeo. And what I found in that market was an incredibly dynamic group of people who were really trying to reinvent television development, to go around the executives in Hollywood who control networks like NBC and FX and HBO, and really pilot shows on their own for their communities or for the people who wanted to fund them, in rare cases, major sponsors. But in that market, I saw this innovation, but I also saw creators maybe not taking as many risks as they could have because they still wanted to ultimately sell those shows to Hollywood. And so when I came here to Chicago, I was really inspired by performers like Ricardo, like Shea, and so many other artists here who are working across disciplines, who are really critically interrogating intersectional identities, identities that intersect with race, gender, sexuality, and class. And so I wanted to create a platform for television that was more interdisciplinary, that integrated different kinds of identities and also different kinds of arts that we don't see on TV, like drag and performance, video artists, poetry, etc. And so all of the artists in OpenTV, most of them don't really identify solely as TV people, right? They are in theater, they're in drag, they're in performance, they're in comedy, sort of alternative comedy scenes, and you'll see that as we talk about these artists' histories today. You'll see two screenings right now. The first will start with Shea Couleé's Lipstick City, which is in our vertical OpenTV Presents. And for me, I've organized OpenTV into 4 content verticals as a way of studying different forms of television development. So we do release pilots on their own through OpenTV Presents, and this is a way of giving a platform for those artists who are on the start of a longer journey. Almost everyone in that series has an extension of that project that's bigger than what you will see here. We also release original series, and so you'll see a teaser scene for Brujos, Ricardo's series, and that is going to be an OpenTV original starting next year. They're currently crowdfunding on Indiegogo, so if you like what you see, go to the Indiegogo page, Google Brujos and Indigo, and give them some money so they can finish this first season. We'll be releasing about 6 other series next year as well. And we'll also have OpenTV community programming, local documentation, and OpenTV Represents will debut in December as a study in indie syndication, or what do indie reruns look like on the web outside of the legacy system. So it's all research-driven, but it's most importantly artist-driven. Nothing can happen without artists like this who have incredible connections to community and been working in Chicago for so many years to bring the city entertainment. So I think with that, we should be queued up for the screening. Great. See you in 15 minutes.
Bonjour chérie, ça va?
I'm well, darling. How are you?
J'ai fatigué.
That's why I didn't wake you.
T'as oublié la date. Ou quoi?
Is that today?
When I get into the office.
Here I have to go. Who loves you?
Toi. cher, très cher.
What?
T'avais raison, il est fait encore. Je vais tout savoir.
Where are you?
Chez moi,
Meet me.
de la discothèque.
Yeah. She knows.
Buena suerte, perra.
Person. Rubber breasts or a rubber crotch. Something's missing. No, then how can we give you a thing? Stop crying. Open your hands, all of sorrow, stark naked. Stop crying. Open your hands, all of sorrow, stark naked. Stop crying. Open your hands, all of sorrow, stark naked. Stop crying. Open your hands, all of sorrow, stark naked.
나의 도움이 필요하다고 들었어. 사랑이란 항상 너의 치명적인 약점이었지. 아무리 네가 애정을 줬어도 결국엔 그런 일을 저질렀구나. 남자들은 단순해. 타락쟁이. 오직 자기만의 이기적인 자존심과 동물적인 본능을 채우려 하는 존재야. 넌 내가 특별한 존재인지 알았겠지만 넌 그에겐 단순한 하나의 정복이라는 걸 드디어 알아차렸구나. 그래, 복수를 원한다면 내가 도움을 주마. 자신의 강함을 감출 수 있는 것도 또 하나의 기술이라고 볼 수 있겠지. 그를 편하게 대해줘. 그놈이 아무것도 예상을 못하도록. 그때 그놈을 찔러버리는 거야.
He's not the one that you should be worried about. Me, on the other hand, that's a different story.
Aquí está tu cambio.
Gracias. Hey, Pa.
Hi, finally. Why you answer my calls, boy?
You know, school, finals. It's really hard right now.
This too shall pass, flaco. Besides, you could do anything if you put your mind to it, right, mijo?
Yeah. I love you, Pa.
You okay, Panfilo?
Yeah. Just stressed out.
Yeah,
Hey, Dad. I gotta go.
Are you seriously studying right now? Like right now when you know what we're about to do?
I needed to get my mind off things.
Panfilo, you are literally the head bitch in charge. Excuse me, head witch in charge? You need me to play some Selena or something?
What do you want me to do?
I need you to start acting like you're our head brujo because you are. People are looking to you to lead us. We're going to war. I get it. You might die. You might not get to get married to some boring guy, buy a condo and adopt an Asian baby. Oh well. So I need you to stop acting like some basic homonormative Boys Town bitch and get it together. Because I have impeccable ally politics and I will be risking my life right next to you. So fag the fuck up and let's go.
Where are we going?
We're gonna go home to take a nap and then we're gonna go kill some straight rich white men who have been running the world for centuries. I need you to smile. This is a good thing. It's a lucky penny. It's a good sign.
It's coming! Oh, pull up! Ah, shit.
Shit.
I'm gonna be so sore.
I shot hard. I shot all over your stomach.
I can feel it.
How you say kid in Spanish?
Huh?
How you say like our kids in Spanish?
Nuestros hijos.
Look at all on nuestros hijos on your belly.
Don't for real. No, stop for real. Time out.
That shit is so cool. Why can't that be my witch power?
You got mind control.
Kiss me then. Come to me.
Now we'll welcome to the stage Ricardo Gamboa and Jaren Merrill, aka Shea Couleé. So I'm going to lead this Q&A portion, and then you all will have a chance to do Q&A after Shea's performance. So I wanted to kind of zero in not on the projects at first, but rather on you both as artists and how you kind of came to the point where you were ready to do a project like this. So Shea, if we could start from you, with you. You went to Columbia to do costume design, and at that point maybe you weren't doing drag, right?
No, drag is something that actually came the summer after I graduated college in 2011. I had grown up doing theater, started performing at like the age of 9. I had been dancing since I was 3. And so I always felt really comfortable on the stage and performing and going through a theater and acting background and then transitioning into costume design my first year at Columbia. I just kind of got this well-rounded love and appreciation for all things performative. And then, when it came to like theater, I felt like sometimes I got some really great roles, and other times I felt like I was passed up on roles because I was too gentle or not more masculine, passing or presenting, more feminine. And so I just decided to try drag. And it was in a performance for a Black burlesque review called Jeezy's Juke Joint, and it was their first one in July of 2011. And I did your standard lip sync performance there, and I got this really wonderful standing ovation. And so that was just a really validating moment. And so as I continued to do drag, I started to understand the deeper meanings in gender performance and what it means for a man, a cis man who exists in a world where, abandoning your manhood or masculinity is looked at as treasonous, though I think that a lot of power comes from femininity and feminine energy. I grew up around really strong, powerful women, and as I continued doing drag, I started to develop a real love for the queer community. The queer community here in Chicago is extremely supportive, and I've just enjoyed my time working with them. So when it came to want to try something different, I feel like as an artist, there are always these moments where you really want to step out of your comfort zone and do something that you've never done before. I have realized in my 5 years of doing drag that drag really is a great medium for so many different artistic expressions. So what other platforms besides, performing a standard lip sync in a nightclub or posting photos on Instagram, like how could I reach the fans? How could I tell a more dynamic story? And so that's when I started to brainstorm Lipstick City.
And so you came to me with the idea. Well, let's not hold off on Lipstick City actually for just a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
And get to. I kind of wanted to follow up what you mentioned about sort of finding power in femininity, and what you see in terms of Chicago drag and like the range of performances that you see here, and like how are people expressing femininity from what you can see?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really powerful about femininity is there tends to be this sense of openness and vulnerability, which sometimes the patriarchy likes to deem as like a sign of weakness, but I really think it's a sign of great power in being in tune with your emotions, with your intentions, and through doing drag and understanding the performance and putting on feminine guys, I started to understand that and appreciate that and find a lot of power in that. Putting on the wig and the heels somehow made me feel more powerful than it did when I was in the sweatpants, the joggers and the sneakers, because there's something really dynamic about this presence, even though I'm terribly underdressed today, sorry, that I feel like really commands attention and makes people behave differently. So that started to become a study in and of itself. And I feel like all of the interactions that go on within the queer community, there's so many different representations. There are people that are genderqueer, we have trans individuals in the community, and it's our performative aspects of our personas, these people that we create when we take it into the nightclub, or as we like to call it, the fantasy, because we all, make believe and dream up these concepts and these things. And sometimes it feels like, it's kind of like sometimes we, as a form of, at least I know as a child who dealt with being, bullied for being different, sometimes you disassociate and you go to other places. And sometimes, in those places that you go in your mind, you come up with really, really brilliant and beautiful things. And then when you put it out in the world and it gets received positively, it becomes really validating and it helps you become more confident and powerful. And I feel like that is what is so interesting about the queer community, because, not everyone, when they come into certain queer spaces, present themselves as like super high femme. There are bearded drag queens. We have people who their drag characters, they present themselves only in the color pink, skin tone, everything, And so someone may walk up to this character, my friend, their name is Imp, and be like, oh, I like your pink dress. And she's like, oh, you mean my nude dress? Because for her and how she developed her character and how she chooses to represent herself, pink is the color of her flesh. It's who she is, So it's always really interesting to see all these different interpretations that exist. Sorry about that. It was a reminder that I was supposed to be here. I'm here. Hi. What was I saying? Yes, all under this larger blanket that is the queer community, you start to see these very personal representations, and as abstract as they are, you can really see something very personal about the individual that's wearing it.
And that kind of really segues into my next question was, the character of Shea Couleé. In Lipstick City, it's kind of you're introducing Shea Couleé to the world. And how did you come up with this character, this persona?
I came up with this persona. I say that Shea Couleé is equal parts bougie and banji. For those of you who don't know what banji means, it means like, a girl that's a little bit like around the way, some girl that you would just like find like on the train playing her music, like without any headphones because she doesn't care. She's going to pick up her brother, from school, banji girl going to pick up her brother from school. And then bougie is, French for bourgeoisie, which, means just really high class. So I like to find this interesting balance between different elements of my own personality, because I grew up in Plainfield, Illinois. And when we moved out there, I was the only child of color in an all-white schooling system and atmosphere. And so for so long, I had to really concentrate on being hyper aware of white culture so that I could assimilate myself in a way that made me more approachable and gained more respect. So that part of me, I feel like, is represented in Miss Couleé, and this, as my friend calls, a professional white woman. She is kind of the aspirations that I have for all things glamour, all things privilege, all things wonderful. And then Shea is a representation of the true blue girl, that beautiful black woman, So that I kind of balance back and forth between those two things. And I feel like so many African Americans and so many people, of color, we have to kind of switch it up when it depends on the space that we're in, If you're in an all black space, you tend to present yourself differently than if you're in an all white space. And I think that those two characters come together to form something that really represents my own experiences, just as a person.
Thank you. And to shift over to Ricardo and talk about your evolution as an artist. Currently you are a PhD student at NYU in American Studies. So you have this kind of really scholarly academic side, but you also have this whole history of really writing and performing. Where did that start from you? performative.
There's a new term that's like kind of been taking off, like from like the early 2000s, right? Like the idea of like arts activism, and like my thing is always like I've been doing arts activism before there was a term, or I knew that's what it was called, and a lot of that was because I grew up on the south side of Chicago, where there's an enormous amount of violence, and if you're questioning youth about why is the world the way it is, there's no way you can't get to the point of being able to critique structures or understand social problems, right? And so that started at a really young age. And I also realized my family friend is Rudy Lozano, the Lozano family, who is an assassinated community activist on the south side of Chicago. There's like schools and libraries named after him now. But I realized at a really young age that, if you talk back to power, you run getting killed. You run the risk of getting killed, whether it's by, police. I also realized that a lot of people choose to go quietly, right? Live these quiet existence of wage labor and just, resigned lives, and find moments of, being able to express themselves within that. And so one of the things that I thought was I don't want to go quietly and I don't want to die, right? Like I love vodka and sex and my family and, things too much to disappear. And so art was always a way to critique, to create a wormhole in the situations that I was in, and then be able to act, talk back to power, and to also find whole new ways of being. And so when I graduated from the University of Illinois in Urbana, I started acting, right? I always loved performing. And what happened when I was in that realm was, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Chicago is 1/3 Latino, 80% of those are Mexican Americans, and there are no Mexican American narratives in the Chicago theater scene. I'm the first ever playwright, native Mexican American playwright produced in Chicago, and that was in 2015, right, for a population that's been here for years. And so a lot of what I was realizing as an actor was that a lot of local voices were absent. When they did represent artists of color, they were usually highly credentialized artists of color. And so and the people that were going to theater were not the people that I wanted to talk to. My communities were priced out of being able to afford to go to the theater. So I founded my own theater company that was dedicated towards creating Mexican immigrant, and then Latino narratives from Chicago. So it was like interviewing people and then making plays. And one of the things I was always really careful about was that it was never going to be like, here's the Mexican that comes over and is making tortillas and is working as a busboy and then is going to die. You know what I mean? Like, it was not like this representation porn or these tragic oppression tales. It's about trying to push it more about how people of color can create theater, can create performance work that has a high aesthetic caliber, that is experimental, and that has dynamic content that is not just about them prostituting their identity or their oppression for the white supremacist gaze. And thank you. And so I kind of started making, I started with Teatro Americano, and then, that kind of, and just kind of doing more and more theater work that I still do today. But one of the things I realized was making plays is really hard, and they're only up usually for 6 weeks. And so film lasted longer, right? You can make a film and it can last longer. And so for a long time I was doing, so around 2010 I made my first film about my aunt who was an alcoholic, based on a spoken word poem, and it won the Chicago Latino Film Festival. And then I made it on less than $1,000. I think I made it on like $300. And I was like, well, this is easy. And then I realized how miserable the world of filmmaking is, and I haven't been able to get out. But to me, it's really important, right? Like as everyday people, we're totally alienated from the shit that gets put on, right? We don't get to actually make any choices of what gets produced. So we're left with only being consumers. And the best of us are critical consumers, right? We're like, we're going to get this water because $2 goes to this kid in Honduras. And we're going to, you know what I mean? Like, no, they invest in the prison industrial complex, so I can't do that. Or, but part of what I realized was was going along the same ideas of who's invisible and who's visible. And then also the idea of being, sidelined to only being able to be a cultural consumer, was that there existed another possibility. And that would be making our own work. And even if it's a slow burn, even if you have to start small, that is an avenue. And you might not see the change you want to make in your lifetime, but it's important to start laying the groundwork. So I think a lot of the film and media, that's kind of the trajectory of how I got there. And so all the work that I do in film and media has been to this point accessible online to free, and has insisted on a high aesthetic caliber. I mean, even something like Brujos, I mean, compared to other budgets, we're filming it on 96K, but we've taken a ton of effort in terms of making sure that a low budget doesn't compromise production value. I mean, I think in the second scene, you can kind of see the string from the sock, but that's actually, we uploaded the wrong version of it. So, but there's actually the one that's on our page actually has that missing, or has that edited out. But yeah, because I think one of the other things we do is when we look at community theater, we see that when they're like, it's work for people of color, they're like, well, they'll be able to handle whatever we give them. And my thing is like, no, like in all my work, it's like the last become the first. And so like, we're going to give them the best quality work. Even if it's for only a 12 episode, 7-minute series, it's going to be the best looking shit ever. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And one of the things I've seen in studying the web series market is that production value standards are getting higher. People are pushing themselves further. Back in 2011, when Issa Rae uploaded Awkward Black Girl, you watched the first couple episodes of that series, and they have millions of views on YouTube, and it really kickstarted her career. Her show on HBO premiered this month, but they're not sophisticated works of film. And what I had to realize as a researcher was that actually I had my own standards for production value that have been established by corporations who have immense resources and time to do that sort of thing. And that actually, for a lot of people, they really connect to stories, right? They want to see something that was written by someone who has an experience that relates to theirs in a very sincere and authentic way. So I want to ask you both about where the story came from for your series, and then how you marshaled the team to get it made. So you can start, Ricardo, in terms of what is the story of Brujos and why are you telling it?
So Brujos is a 12 episode, 7-minute per episode series that follows 4 gay Latino doctoral students that are also witches. And they are trying to stay alive during a witch hunt that's led by the straight, wealthy, white, male descendants of the first New World colonizers. So it's like half documentary, right?
Especially now with this election.
Right. But so what it, it's kind of predicated on a lot of things. Part of it was my own upbringing, where something like magic and brujeria was kind of laced into Mexican culture, right? We have Day of the Dead, where it's a sincere belief you can conjure your dead and interact with them. Another big part of it was going to grad school. And I went to grad school to study hyper-incarceration of black bodies, and then immigration policy, and the policing of brown bodies. And what I kept on doing in terms of researching that was being like, but why? But why? But why? And then all of a sudden I was reading historical texts from 500 years ago and looking at how the logics that are underpinning the way that we think, even what we know how to imagine, had a root in colonization. And are scarily not that far evolved from that moment, right? Like, it's why we can have settler colonialism popping off in places in the world today, and gentrification. That's kind of like this neoliberal, brand of colonization in certain ways. And so, and then I also am a queer brown human, right? And so part of it was, or person, I don't know if I'm human, but so part of it was kind of then taking these things and mixing them together and then trying to ask questions. One of the things that happens in the series is that the protagonists realize that not all witches are gay Latinos. And so they start encountering, other women of color, trans people of color, just other bodies that also possess magic. And one of the things I was really interested in looking at is like this idea of when you look at like the history of slavery, of the slavery of indigenous people, of wage labor, of these things that us as humans have survived, and that, and that the things that black other women of color, people of color kind of have been through, I was really obsessed with the idea of the supernatural. And how supernatural doesn't just refer to characters that can move things with their mind or magic, but also how we are able to love and understand ourselves under the immense weight and systems of oppression that we live in. And so that was kind of where the story came from. Again, my thing is always about, like, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. So like those big budgets that Aymar is talking about, so much of it is to confer value, right? And we have this fantasy that film is a democratic medium, right? But they price it out so that it can't be. So my whole thing is low budget, sustainable filmmaking that sews your audience into it, right? It's not just like, here, you guys, I know what you want. It's like, how do you work with people to create a cultural ecology, not just a product that you hope is gonna soar in the cultural economy. And so I think that's kind of where it works. It was really important to me that the production team reflects, who we are, and what the politics of the show are. So it was really, I hired Rashmi Hazra Rastabaki as my co-director. She's an Indian woman, and I wanted there to be a woman of color co-director on that. The cast is composed of 20 people of color, the principal cast, 20 people of color, queer, trans, and queer and trans people and women of color, and it's intergenerational. One of the female lead is a 60-year-old Afro-Latina woman, and that's countered by a 14-year-old Mexican immigrant boy, character in there. And part of it, so much of me is about how do you make work that isn't just reifying identity confines, but gets us to think about how our identities actually are non-equivalent but linked with each other. And how do you navigate that in a real way?
And I do want to talk a little bit more about the ecology of artists that you brought to make this, but I do want to ask Shea also about where Lipstick City's story came from. You talked a little bit about Shea versus Miss Couleé, and the story kind of adds revenge kind of in there.
Well, revenge is just part of the plot line because I think it's sexy. Really, the film, I'm very much so visually inspired. I really, really do love fashion, and I think that my love for clothing and the way that you present yourself and the way that you put on these different guises not only affect the way that you feel, but it affects the way that people behave around you. I used to watch my mom, who is a career woman, and come home from work, in a pantsuit, and then had to go out to dinner with my dad, and then what that transformation was like, what characteristics about her changed when she went through, the bubble bath and the makeup and the hair, this ritual. There's this ritual that comes along with that transformation process. And so really when I started brainstorming this film, I just wanted different vignettes that represented different visuals that I found very appealing. And then story-wise, I just really wanted to weave in something that had to deal with revenge and love and what we feel when a person has crossed us and how we go about, dealing with that. And also on just a grander scale, the plot of it is really abstract. I just wanted to give glimpses for a wider audience into this queer community that exists, kind of underground and in these nightclubs. The spaces that I tend to work in are a little bit more alternative than your more mainstream Boys Town circuit Halstead strip spaces because in my career, I've never felt terribly welcome in those spaces. So the ones that did welcome me, which were more, queer artistic based, there's so many things that go on that I feel like people couldn't even imagine. Sometimes I'm living my life and I'm in a club and I'm working, at a party like Queen, and you're standing with someone who's dressed like a cloud doing bumps of coke in the stall and you're like, is this my life? And there's this element of just not caring and not giving a fuck and just wanting so badly to just live this fantasy and depart from, the oppressive world that we live in. And that is what I wanted to show in this film. And I feel like still, even what we captured on camera, just can't do it justice, because it was this really staged kind of moment that we were creating these shots, that were really heavily produced. I'm kind of curious if we took a more documentative approach and just kind of went into these spaces and took this footage, what that would be like. But ultimately, I just wanted to give someone just a peek into the window of the lives of, all these people that exist in these spaces and what it feels like when you're taking it in. So that was mostly what Lipstick City was.
And kind of like Ricky, the people, of Q&A. Got it. 10 of Q&A, yeah. The people in the film are like the people in those spaces, and the spaces that you filmed in are those spaces.
Yeah, and that was what was so great too, because we had a very small budget, but I had very big ideas. Similar to Ricardo, I said, I want this production to look great. First of all, I'm a drag queen, so I need to be lit amazingly. And lights cost money, so you're just like, not to mention, I'm also a dark girl. So then there's also this other challenge that comes into play when you're thinking about film and how I need to be lit. Because sometimes, there may have been in a scene where I was, with a white person or even like a passable, like lighter person of color, and they're like, girl, like these lights are blowing them out. And I was just like, well, then I think you're just gonna have to switch her with a darker girl. Because I was just like, I'm not going anywhere. Like she worked really hard on this, so really ultimately like the film is just like a really great exploration and is showing people a little glimpse into my life and experiences these past 5 years working in this scene.
So Ricardo, if you could talk a little bit about what are the different kinds of artists that have helped you make this project happen? I mean, there's definitely the crew and the actors, but you've also marshaled, sound artists and graphic designers. How has that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so part of what we have, like these whole fantasies of meritocracy, right? And these whole fantasies of who's the best for the job, right? And usually it's about this interview process and looking at resumes and deciding what credentials matter. And for me, like what I started in my own career, what I realized how many times I've been blocked out or locked out of certain opportunities because of not having access to even the things that allow you to get those credentials. And so one of the things that I've always been really hardcore about is about not trying to reiterate that system, right? And that credentials do not mean you're great. It's called credentialization, right? And I don't believe in professionalism. I believe in professionalization. And those are things that I want nothing to do with, right? Sometimes it's problematic, right? But I think a lot of the times what I've tried to do is think about how does the production process and who you bring to work in something actually model how to create an alternative world, how to create a new world. And part of that has been investing in community, investing in hyper-local people, and then also trying to honor the people that have kind of really paved the way for me. So with something like Brujos, we have Scrappers Film Group that works on socially conscious films as one of our producing partners. My longtime collaborator Ben Kolak is our cinematographer and working with one of the owners of Scrappers. Sadie Woods, who's one of my friends, she's a DJ in Chicago and sound artist. Amar's going to one of her shows right after this with Baraka de Soleil at the Stony Island Arts Bank. But then also just kind of Orlando Camacho, who's a graphic design artist who designed designed the first 3 episodes as graphic novel, in style. And then our cast is really interesting.
May
Karen,
from the
we have May Anantarungsan, who is actually a Thai witch living out on the West Coast that kind of did our graphic and visual identity resources. And then as far as the cast, I mean, our cast right now ranges from Karen Finley, who's a seminal performance artist, had a case that went up against the NEA, and now was one of my professors and mentors, and is now plays a professor and mentor to my character in this show. And then Draven Torres, who's a gay Latino porn star who plays a witch. And then also a lot of the artists that I've been working with in Chicago over the years, and those range from youth that I've trained from when they were 12, queer youth of color that are now 21 and 22, and then other artists. I guess one of the things that's really important to me, I think I might be talking too much, but I'll wrap it up with this, is this idea of representation. Right? And we're always talking about more representation, but the thing about representation is it only works if the thing that it claims to be representing isn't actually there. Right? So when Congress is supposed to represent us or represent the people, it only works because we don't show up, right? Like if we all showed up to Capitol Hill, they'd be like out of a job, right? We would just be able to tell them what we want, And the same thing that happens in media, right? You watch these shows that are supposed to represent the hood, and if you're a person of color, you're like, that motherfucker is not from the ghetto, really. Like, right? Like, that is an actor acting as such. And so I think so much of my work is about letting people self-represent, and about trying to close that gap and actually not representing fantasies of what someone's reality is, but giving them a seat at the table in the production process, even if they're just the actor that has 2 lines, to kind of shape the content of it and represent themselves and where they come from.
And last question for Shea. You kind of allowed a lot of drag queens to represent themselves in Lipstick City, which I think was an organizational feat maybe at first, but
yes.
How was that experience, and why did you do that?
I wanted to do that because, just in terms of representation, I wanted everyone to have the opportunity to come and present themselves in their most authentic way under these imaginary circumstances and just give us their best. I wanted people to see these people because these individuals have contributed so much to who I am as an artist, because believe it or not, them just showing up and being present is inspiring to me. And I'm not talking about like the filming of this. I'm talking about like when we're just out, when someone comes into the club and they have this like amazing look on that represents like an internal intention. It's just like, it's always a breath of fresh air. It's always something that I find really dynamic. So I just wanted all these really amazing artists to come and show off, what they're made of, and just use it as a time capsule, to document this and then just have it for people to consume. Same way that you were talking about theater. Theater is this thing that we like rehearse and work towards, and then you put it up and then it disappears. So this was like a really great way while we're all, in a certain place in our careers, in a certain climate, and what's happening artistically in this community, to document it and then just have it there for years and years to come.
Yes, and I think, I call this program Slow Artistic Indie TV because I was thinking about the kind of TV we're doing with Open TV as like slow food, right? Food, products that are made locally, that take time and care, and a sensitivity to the environment around it, right? You saw 15 minutes worth of programming, but clearly, it's taken years and years for both of these artists to get to the point to make what you saw. So I would just encourage you to explore Open TV at weareopen.tv. We are on Facebook at Open TV Beta, and watch some of our other programming. There's only 10 hours of it, so you could watch everything in less than a day. And we'll be coming back next year with more. We'll be premiering on January 31st at the Museum of Contemporary Art with the first episodes of several of our new programs, including Brujos. So please check that out as well. And right now we do want to have Shea perform because we have her here in full drag, and let's see some of the magic, and then we'll take questions from you. Thanks.